think a natural kind of challenge or obstacle that many of us experience is the same self-idea that motivates most of our pursuits, goals and plans and schemes, that now in our spiritual practice we want to let go of. We try to let go with that same intention mind, goal mind, time mind, meaning we're applying some method and hope to get a result. That scheme is the self still operating. So when you as a separate person try to let go or try to taste what presence tastes like, or try to appreciate the vibrancy of presence, kind of checking it out, you're observing it, maybe you're disappointed, maybe it's not so vibrant, maybe you don't feel so happy even though you seem to be somewhat in the present. So that paradigm is the separate self looking at presence, looking at what it takes to be presence, and evaluating it and judging it. And as soon as you have that, you have dissatisfaction. So you can't feel the real joy of presence. If the self is looking at presence, it's a subject looking at an object and evaluating it, trying to decide how great it is or not so great it is. Just as the self might notice a span of time of being caught in some thinking pattern and then trying to let go of it. If you have a song come into your head, that often happens to me, and then your self is trying to banish that song from your head. So this is all natural. Self trying to create a self-free zone, but it can't do it, and it can't appreciate presence by the very act of the self looking at presence. But it's okay to try. We're used to the self directing everything, so we don't know what it is to not do that. While you believe yourself to be the self, at least you can put the self to use to try to let go of itself. But it can't really happen. But in trying to do that, you might discover the futility. And then surrender can happen. One thing that's helpful is remembering death, actually. This is focused on in some traditions of non-dual spiritual practice, sometimes as a preliminary. To really remember, we're growing old quickly. and pretty soon we'll die. And then all our schemes and plans come to an end. Anything we think we're going to create and make of our lives will all be lost. That helps us realize the futility. It's so alluring, all the things we think are substantial that we can pursue as selves in this world. Right, on the gross level, comfort and money and maybe fame or at least reputation. Right, partnership, sense of accomplishment, sense of pride. I'm getting less gross level, started gross level. So it's so alluring to think that this is going to bring us what our heart really wants. We have to start realizing that it doesn't. Little temporary blips, little temporary excitement points, and we might feel relieved briefly because we stopped seeking, and then we're seeking for the next thing. We're evaluating our situation from the point of view of the self, being separate from the situation. So we always feel disconnected, not there yet, a job to do. And this pattern just continues, and we grow old, and then we die. If you look at that very honestly, it helps to realize these pursuits are meaningless, futile. Anything that the self comes up with as a new goal, new pursuit, has an edge of tension and anxiety in it, feeling of weight in it, feeling of unsurety and doubt, insecurity. Sense of waiting, not there yet. If we look at that, this all sounds maybe a little pessimistic. It's a good kind of pessimistic. It's the kind of pessimistic that might help us surrender our holding on to false things, false hopes. When we really see that, when we really see the futility, that the self is just going to crumble, sooner or later, a little bit it crumbles all the time. We get disappointed all the time. But even if we're not clear about that, we know that eventually we're going to completely crumble. So when we see that, we can something can drop away, and we realize nothing I try to do makes any sense or has any real value. Nothing I try to do, including my spiritual practice. And what happens when you stop trying? That's when our practice is born. when we really stop trying. And then nothing disappears, then there's something there. But you're not trying anymore, so it's not you. Something there, it's just presence. It's not you looking at presence and evaluating it, because you've given that up. You know that's hopeless. The evaluations are always going to be negative. The pursuits are always going to be futile. So you just give up and discover what's there when you just give up. That's you didn't make or do anything. It's just there. And there's no use in evaluating it or seeing how it can serve you. There's no you. You gave that up. There's just what's happening anyway. That's presence. It's all presence, but that's presence without the veil. And there's no person there evaluating it. It's just has its own intrinsic beauty. And it has no sections, it has no separations. It has no limits. It's infinitely vast. It's just everything happening. It's not about you and other people or some particular distance or some time. It all just falls away. It's just the whole happening. This is not something yourself can evaluate. It's just what's there when yourself surrenders. Self can't make it happen. Although, if the self pursues this direction, it inevitably starts to run into its own contradictions and surrender becomes more and more likely. Little cracks start happening. So just remember, whenever you're in control of your spiritual practice, it hasn't arrived. In the relative sense. It's always arrived, but you haven't removed the veil yet. So there's still that grip of self and evaluating and hoping and wanting to control. Still that anxiety phenomena operating. But as we see it less and less as valid, important, it starts to dissipate of itself. So when you return to practice, whether it's coming to a sitting, when you're sitting in the morning or any time during the day, or whether you just return to practice in the midst of any activity, notice what the self is trying to do, what intention and motive is there, wanting to control, wanting to get a certain result. And just notice, oh, there's the self trying to do something, and it's all for naught, and it's just going to die. And if you know it's eventually going to die, instead of waiting for that and fearing it, just let it happen now. Just say, well, if it's futile, then I just give up now. If it's going to happen pretty soon anyway, I just give up now. And then what's here? Famous story of the young Ramana Maharshi. This was kind of his path. He actually enacted. He had a big fear of death in his teen years, and he wanted to face it, and so he just enacted dying right now as best he could. Just laid down, closed his eyes. I don't know if he tried to stop breathing, but just gave up. And then discovered there's something that's not him, that's just alive. That's what's really alive. That's what's always been alive. It had a little dance of a me idea also coming out of it for a while. All our ideas of the things we think will make us happy. All of the ideas of how we think we're going to save the world. If we're honest, it's not working. If we let it rest, if we let it drop, then we can discover something infinitely vast that's always working. It's always working because it doesn't need to get to some goal. It's already complete. It already includes everything. All the appearances of gain and loss are just a dance. It's just a dance. I don't know what these words will do. It's just a dance. We're coming here to sit together. It's just a dance.
You use the word dance because there is no purpose behind it, or there is no intention.
Yeah. And if it's improv dance, you don't know what you're doing. I guess if some dances are very structured, right, that maybe you're trying to get to a goal, that would be a little less good metaphor. Although I think in any dance, even if it's structured, if you're really into it, you forget about that. It just happens. And there's also a sense that it's beautiful, it's fun. But you don't know why. There's nothing to it. It's not accomplishing anything. Same with music, something like that. Any art, really. Plastic art's, though, is a little more easy to get caught up in accomplishing something if you're making it, you know. But in performing arts, you're just doing it. So, done, gone. Religious ritual can also be the same kind of thing, just an art, just a performance, just a dance. Unless you think it's accomplishing something, many conventional religions think it's accomplishing something, then you have a big problem. You go right back into the self idea.
So if I'm cold, I put it. Feel like we just feel comfortable. I don't feel that we need to go from it. Relax. Present. Distraction. Cold. We can put some clothes on. Just give the idea of
The more it has that idea, the more problems there'll be, the more anxiety there'll be. But often it's just, you get cold, you just put a coat on. It's not much thinking about it. And it's not going to be much problem. So the body, the mind body, whatever you want to call the personal self, which doesn't exist as we think it does, but it appears that way, it will always go toward comfort. Some kind of comfort. I mean, someone might think that means having a big house, and someone else might think it means flagellating yourself because now you're more holy, you know, whatever it is. It always goes to what it thinks is more happy. That's okay, but awakening is understanding that true release and satisfaction happens when there's no purpose. When you realize there is no you to pursue anything. It's all just happening. That's where our true relief is. It's not in putting that coat on. But it doesn't mean you can't put the coat on. There's no problem putting the coat on. Putting the coat on and not putting the coat on are exactly equal in its ultimate significance. But, you know, from the self's point of view, it's cold, so it puts a coat on. There's no problem with that. But if you think putting that coat on is going to bring you contentment, it's not true. You could be content being cold, and you can be incredibly discontent being warm. It's not really related. It's just what we do. We're hungry, we eat. We're cold, we put clothes on. It's true that for most of us, if we have a lot of physical discomfort, we'll have a lot of self-anxiety. We'll also have a lot of self-anxiety. So there's something to be said for having a certain level of comfort that the self wants in order to relax enough to even start appreciating what presence is. Because if you're starving and you really need food, you're just not going to, most people will just not appreciate presence because they're thinking about food. So a certain amount of comfort is good. On the other hand, a lot of comfort might not be so good.
Then you're focused on keeping the comfort.
You're focused on keeping the comfort, and also you keep yourself away from discomfort so much, you're always a little afraid of discomfort, and some of it will creep in no matter how luxurious your life is, right? So being okay with being a little uncomfortable sometimes and comfortable sometimes, that helps realize it all doesn't matter, actually.
Some purpose, sorry, does take thought, you know.
Yeah, practical purposes generally take thought. It's just that that's not where we're going to get ultimate happiness or satisfaction in life. We're just not going to get it from purposes. But to do things, to get somewhere, you need some thought. And, you know, if we didn't have any of that, I suppose we'd just be lying down on the ground until we die or something.
So, purpose is okay.
Purpose is okay if you don't think it's going to bring you satisfaction. When we think purpose will bring us satisfaction, that then it becomes delusion and causes suffering.
Purpose is part of life.
Purpose is part of life, yeah, but it won't bring you, it's not what your heart desires. It's just something that happens. It's like, you know, it's like any other phenomenon that happens.
Should we celebrate purpose? In that it's part of life.
The problem is if you celebrate, the self idea, the delusive idea, thinks that purpose will bring happiness. So when we select purpose to celebrate and not other things, we're kind of reinforcing that idea, and that idea is mistaken because it won't bring us that satisfaction. So ideally, purpose arises and we enact it and we let it go and we don't make a big thing about it. What we really should celebrate is everything. Because everything is always equally truth. If you celebrate purpose and not things that are not purpose, you're elevating this one thing that is commonly thought of as bringing us relief.
Celebrate as in part of this life. That's what it means in particular.
I mean, I think the best way to deal with purpose arising particularly is not to elevate it. Just notice it coming and going. Because it's the alluring thing. You know, it's kind of like saying if someone has a drug habit, should you celebrate taking the drug if you're addicted to it? Not really. But you shouldn't deny that you have an addiction either. You should just notice it coming up. I mean, that's a little strong because, I mean, many purposes are not addiction, so they're fine. But we do get addicted to certain purposes. And so if we celebrate it, we're reinforcing that those purposes are so significant. And when we think purposes are significant, we tend to ignore everything else. You know, my purpose is to get to 9th Street. So 8th Street and 7th Street and 6th Street I'm ignoring, and I'm trying to get to 9th Street, you know. But actually 6th Street and 7th Street and 8th Street are just as important as 9th Street. If you have something to do on 9th Street, it's fine to go to 9th Street, but 6th Street and 7th Street and 8th Street are just as important. Every second is just as important. That realization is what gives us relief. Getting to 9th Street doesn't. So getting to 9th Street it's just a thing we do. Because we have to do something, it seems. Yeah.
I suppose I just think that you see purpose in action all around us. Just with other species.
I think with other species, it's not the same. Because they're not, as far as we know, I mean, we're just guessing obviously, but they're not conceiving of a purpose.
I suppose
they're just being carried along.
That's where I'm a little bit confused why it needs to be seen in that way with humans. Why we can't just, why we have to say when humans do purpose. I know it's very prevalent.
It's just because we do. That's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the conception of purpose. Once there's no conception of purpose, I wouldn't even call it purpose anymore. But the act of putting on the coat, that's why I said that's no problem at all. You know? But thinking like, I'm cold and that's bad, and when I get that coat on, that'll be good, then problems are arising.
So I suppose what I'm thinking, isn't that adding something to purpose?
To me, maybe we're using the word differently, but to me I would say that that's what purpose is. I don't think a squirrel has a purpose when it runs up the tree. It just runs up the tree. We say it has a purpose because there's a dog coming, and it wanted to get away from the dog, so it ran up the tree. But it didn't go like, there's a dog coming, I want to get away from the dog, I'm going to run up the tree. So where do we start using the word purpose? You know, that's depends. From the human thinking perspective, we can say there's all these purposes to what animals do. But I don't think they're thinking that. They're just doing it. And so I wouldn't even call that purpose. Because purpose has a future thinking, a future idea, as we usually use it, I think. You know, my purpose is for this thing in the future.
When I lived with a dog growing up, and she wasn't supposed to sit on the couch. But sometimes if she was alone in the room, she'd sit on the couch. And you'd come downstairs, and just as you open the door, you'd see her back legs coming off the couch. Just at the same time.
Yeah, so I don't know with dogs, you know, they're the animals that are closer to ourselves, so they might start having a little of this past and future thing, and maybe there was anxiety while sitting on the couch, but ideally the dog wouldn't have any anxiety on the couch, but someone comes, it suddenly feels like get off the couch, and it just gets off the couch, and then there's no problem.
Dogs also have anxiety, some dogs do.
But it's much more immediate. So maybe there's a little time holding, much less than we do, but maybe a little time hold. But
I don't think they obsess over things.
yeah, I mean, even if it's scared in the moment, it's just scared in the moment. It's not thinking, I'm a fearful dog, like we do. I'm a fearful person. I wish I wasn't fearful. It's not saying I wish I wasn't fearful. It's just shaking, you know? Much less layers. I mean, I wouldn't even call that suffering then. It's just shaking. And then the thing passes and it stops shaking and it's gone. Whereas we hold, that happened and that's part of who I am. And it's going to happen again, and I have to manipulate things to make it happen less or something like that. And then we've lost being alive and we're instead planning our life. So you feel cold and you grab that sweater and you put it on, there's very little problem. But you think about, oh, I don't want to go to that place and do that thing because it's going to be cold, and then we get into more anxiety and missing this life happening.
If you're cold and you haven't got a sweater, and you haven't got a sleeping bag, and you're looking around, you're thinking of things, you've got a purpose.
Yeah.
To substitute for that sweater that you just automatically pick up and put on.
Yeah, I think there's some anxiety that usually arouses there. The best would be to just be cold. And if it's dangerously cold, you start to do something. You start to run. Or you go toward a house, but it could be done in a way it's totally alive in that moment. I mean, some of my most alive times, personally speaking, that I can remember are not comfortable.
Because I was actually, alive the word that I was just going to use for my experiences in that kind of situation.
Yeah.
Is it brings much more than aliveness than just picking up a jumper.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like being very present with my surroundings.
Yeah.
And looking at them.
Right.
And it really, that's the time when it feels like it comes alive more, when it's not straightforward to just do this. It's just a routine. Cold, you put it on.
I would guess that's happening because of the newness of the situation, so you're fresh. And so in that sense it brings you into the moment. I think that's the positiveness of that. I don't think it's positive because you have something you have to fix. You know, I think it's just there's nothing deadening about routine in itself. There's nothing deadening about an automatic, you feel cold and you pick up the sweater. That's beautiful. It's just that when we're doing routine, we tend to obsess about other things, and that's what makes it negative. We tend to be, I'm picking up the sweater, and I don't notice I'm picking up the sweater because I'm thinking about how this person said I'm an asshole or something, or I'm thinking about what do I have to do tomorrow, or I'm thinking about this phone call I just had. So we're doing routine things, and we consider that not very alive because we're actually caught on thinking of something else. But if we're really just alive with, and the sweater just goes on, and we didn't even know, we didn't even think about grabbing it and putting it on, but we're with it, you know, then it's quite a beautiful experience. You know? Like dancing. Like I was using the dancing metaphor. You're dancing, you don't have any idea of figuring out the dance, but you're very with it. You're also not thinking about next week or what that person said to me or something like that.
Yeah,
So,
I still find it difficult to really grasp the idea that it's not being alive thinking. I mean, it's all words.
yeah, I mean, it's a matter of when we're thinking, we tend to exclude a lot and focus on certain things that are under our control and we have some level of anxiety about, that's all. Whereas we could be dropping that anxiety and being nourished by what is.
Yeah, I suppose when I'm going back to that situation again, there may have been times when it felt like anxiety, there might have been times, a lot of time I feel excitement in that situation.
Yeah, I hear that and I sympathize with that. I recognize that also. What I'm suggesting is those times you're less invested in getting the goal of whatever you're working on. That's not really prominent. It's just prominent that you're really vibrant in the present because of the freshness of it. You know? And maybe even the discomfort of it, it just makes you feel more. You know? Because the most alive times I can think of is it's often an unusual situation, so it's fresh. And there might be discomfort there, so your body feels very alive. But there doesn't have to be something you're trying to do. In fact, I think it helps if there isn't something you're trying to do. You know, you suddenly come across something, you know, that's surprising. And you're just enthused by it, shocked by it. So I think giving ourselves unusual tasks sometimes makes us feel somewhat more alive, mostly because it just brings us to a place where we can't think of distracting things so much. We're a little more present. But we still have, if we still have a future thing in mind that we're going toward, there's somewhat of a filter on what's actually happening. There's somewhat of an exclusive focus that's cutting some things out. Whereas when we completely don't know, and we're completely not holding on to something in the future, we can be fully immersed in what's actually happening. You know, it's like running an obstacle race, maybe. You start out with a goal of getting to the finish line of the obstacle race, and that gets you into the race. But while you're actually doing it, the goal drops away. It no longer becomes important to get to the finishing line. You're just in the obstacle. But as soon as you start imagining crossing the finish line and thinking about the other people in the race and if they're going to cross the finish line first, you're less appreciative of the actual intensity of the moment. So I do think it can be useful to give yourself a goal to help you bring you into a situation that feels more alive. Like you might have the goal of climbing the mountain. And you use that as just something to get to kind of, you trick the self into doing something that'll be intense to get to this mountaintop. But as long as getting to the mountaintop is really so important, you can't enjoy being alive. But you use that to just get yourself going, and then you're surprised and totally immersed in what it is to just take steps. Getting to the mountaintop or not becomes completely irrelevant.
So we trick ourselves with everything. Like I trick myself into thinking I'm being one of the warm, so I can enjoy the moment of experiencing what's around me. Yeah,
but the problem is we often the trick doesn't work often. We really are focused on the goal and we're not noticing the moment. But when it does work, then the thing we got ourselves to do, that particular activity, drops away, and just in that activity takes over. But most people don't, most of the time, we don't let ourselves be totally taken over. So we stay attached to this idea of what the purpose is and what the goal is, and through time, in other words, we stay in time.